We need to identify every instance of cryptography and then subset those to those which will be impacted in a post-quantum world. So the order of magnitude of complexity and capital investment cycles here means that it is significantly more complex and costly than what we had to deal with Y2K.
This is Code and Country with host Ian L. Patterson.
Welcome to Code and Country, where we explore the intersection of cybersecurity, national security, and geopolitics. Our guest today is Ollie Whitehouse, Chief Technology Officer at the UK's National Cyber Security Centre, NCSC. Ollie brings more than 25 years of hands-on and strategic experience across both public and private sectors, from NCC Group to Symantec, to now leading NCSC's technology mission at a national scale. Ollie, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let's maybe start from the beginning. So you worked across just about every part of the cybersecurity ecosystem. What led you to take on this role as CTO, and why now?
There are two ways of answering that question. So one is I provided advice for 10 years to the department. And then there's the joke version, which is I then realized you had to take a job here to drive the change for the advice that you were giving. The less jokey answer is, I think in total, nearly 30 years in the private sector, and it was a wonderful experience. But then, you could see the way the world was heading, and you look at a young family, and then there's a point at which you go, how do I de-risk the future as much as I can? And obviously, when you come into an organization like this, it affords you an opportunity through the brilliant people which are here to have outsized impact. So it was very much, I think I run out of runway of things I wanted to do in the private sector, and a sense of kind of mission and national service, and the moons aligned, and here we are.
What is the role of the National Cybersecurity Centre as part of the broader cyber ecosystem?
Yeah, so NCSC fulfills a very unique position inside the UK system. So we're the National Technical Authority for Cybersecurity, which sounds extremely grand because it is. But in short, what it means is we are the government department that acts as the final authority on cybersecurity matters. And so that means we undertake the deep research. So we do everything here from microelectronics research through to cryptographic algorithm design and everything in between. So cloud, operating systems, and all of that. But we can provide an unbiased set of views and perspectives, technical architecture design patterns, et cetera, to our government stakeholders, which will be a mixture of policy departments. So those departments who are defining kind of government cybersecurity policy, we end up being kind of the technical muscle that underpins them in part. But then obviously operational departments within UK government who are trying to deliver IT and IT security on behalf of the government's own needs. And so we get to be that enabler that underpins it all with actual technical foundations and that insight derived from the research that we do and that we work with our academic and industry partners on.
So I believe that you're the NCSC's first CTO. Maybe tell me a little bit about what your vision was stepping into it and how you started shaping it.
Yeah, so there was a technical director here beforehand, but it was the first time that they tried to create a role which was cross-cutting all of NCSC as a CTO. And I think, when you come in, you see the scale of what we're trying to address ultimately. And then you spend an awful lot of time saying, how do you enable the brilliant people who are already here, thousands of them? How do you ensure that the system is set up to allow some of the brightest technologists I've had the fortune of work with to have the greatest impact? And so a lot of that is kind of making sure that they're getting the support they need, that they are getting their kind of the right level of platform for them to be able to speak and influence and drive technical direction. And then that ultimately we have the things which enable us to scale, understanding that government is not going to be able to do all of this on its own. And so very much kind of came in with an appreciation of the strengths, but obviously also the weaknesses of the private sector and how it may contribute to mission. But then obviously, deep experience of actually creating environments for technologists to actually thrive in. And it's between those two things that I've started to kind of shape the role in making sure that we have what our staff need, but then also that we have an eye on kind of route to impact on the outside.
And what is the role as a government agency? How do you interact with the private sector?
Thank you for listening to Code and Country, sponsored by Plurilock. If you're enjoying this episode, please remember to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast. And now, back to the episode.
So we have a variety of mechanisms. So if you think of NCSC in the private sector as, I guess, through two lenses. So one is, how do we help the private sector secure itself? And so we talk about how we empower the private sector with the knowledge and the insight in order to take the right kind of defensive actions in order to ensure that they're resilient. Then for the cybersecurity sector specifically, the NCSE creates a number of schemes which effectively defines what good looks like. So that stretches from security laboratories, incident response companies, consultancies, penetration testing, etc. And we define a criteria of what a kind of good, competent individual company in that space looks like. And then we certify and accredit against that. And that creates then the capacity in the market for people who are able to then kind of consume those services by those people in order to kind of get the services of basic competent individuals that one would hope.
So maybe building on that, one of the big topics that you talked about is fixing what's broken in the cybersecurity market. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you publicly said that the cyber market is in fact broken, which is a strong statement. So what's your perspective? What's broken and who's paying the price?
Yeah, so I think if anyone has ever worked for any company producing technology, I think we would all recognize that the market today does not sufficiently reward things like secure by design and basically requisite security investment in the production of technology and running of services. And that's fundamentally what is broken. We still favor functionality over kind of the actual legitimate cybersecurity. And so because there isn't the sufficient reward cycle to the vendors, it's seen as a cost. Cybersecurity is a cost, right? It is a penalty which detracts from producing features that the customers ultimately want and pay for. And so we get this kind of substandard set of technology being produced, which is not sufficiently resilient for the contemporary threat. And because of the marvels of commercial contracting, the people who are producing this technology are effectively able to limit their liability so they don't have any through the commercial contract. So we have technology which is being produced substandard and then no recompense for that but by their customers. And so ultimately those that end up picking up the price for this is twofold. So one is kind of the customer ends up having to pay if they bought something which is deficient and or their insurer, best case. And then the wider society more generally through the disruption and everything else that we see. And so you're right, we believe that the fundamentals to addressing cybersecurity ultimately is a market incentives challenge because the market today is not functioning, rewarding those who do make the right levels of investment appropriately.
So I'm really curious, how does AI fit into that? Because you've been writing about AI and cyber for years, well before it was trendy. Where are we with AI now, from your perspective? Are we on the verge of a precipice of change, or are we perhaps marketing forward, as some would say?
So we describe it as being in a moment of boiling frogs. So the reality is that we've got the arrival of AI for both offensive and defensive purposes, and the kind of the environment in which we are operating is changing by virtue of that. So we have examples of commercial companies who are very successfully and demonstrating that AI can be applied for vulnerability discovery and exploitation, arguably. But similarly, we are seeing companies equally apply it effectively to cyber defense purposes. And so kind of where we are is we are living it. We are living that transition now, right? We assert that there will not be an AI event in inverted commas where the world radically changes. What we're already seeing is a transition to kind of post-AI pervasive world. We also see that we are, the world is going to be a net positive here, but the path between where we are and where we're going to is going to be uneven and a bit bumpy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at RSA this past year, and the consequential technology demos that I saw were the the AI agents working in a SOC, and some very impressive examples of actual value being created by these agentic AI models. And then at the same time, I'm also through various signal communities, et cetera, seeing in real time, the progress that some of the offensive cyber makers are having around using reinforcement learning to do either vulnerability research or autonomous pen testing, we'll say. And so it seems like both the defenders and the attackers are making huge strides around actually adopting this new technology. Do you have a sense right now? Is it favoring one side versus the other? Or are we more likely to see some significant benefits on the defensive side or on the offensive side, or is it anybody's guess?
No, and again, our position here is just that we'll be net beneficiaries of AI in terms of cyber defense, and the rationale there is there are more people who want to do good with AI who will go after this than there are bad. But then also you can also see massive opportunity in remediation at code level vulnerabilities at scale. Similarly, in the cyber deception space, we're already seeing evidential value in terms of being able to overwhelm adversary capability in terms of being able to consume the information that they've stolen through synthetic content generation. So again, there is the true defense, and then there is the kind of imposing cost on the adversaries who wish to do us harm. So I think anyone, naturally there's a tendency for people who want to sell things to catastrophize on the adversary advantage. But I think we have to be realists here, and all the signs are pointing to there's more money flowing into VC for defensive purposes because the market's bigger.
Yeah, although with the amount of ransomware payments that are getting made, there's a decent amount of money flowing to the bad guys as well.
Yes, but that supposes that they are organized, able to have discipline in terms of operation, a long-term strategy, and it isn't kind of tactical smash and grab. But
Yeah, fair. Maybe sticking on the emerging technologies theme, I'd love to ask you about quantum. From my perspective, the global experts for quantum computing and therefore, post-quantum cryptography are the signals intelligence agencies, the government agencies who have been presumably looking at this for years and years and years. You said that preparing for post-quantum cryptography will make the Y2K bug look easy. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so if you think that with Y2K, we had a specific problem, find all the date fields, increase them by 2 bytes, job done, mission complete, unfurl banner, all go home. I think, fast forward 25 years now or longer, because we had to have it done by the turn of the century. What we're asking for is we need to identify every instance of cryptography and then subset those to those which will be impacted in a post-quantum world, some of which will involve hardware upgrades and not just software upgrades, some, et cetera, et cetera. So the order of magnitude of complexity and capital investment cycles here, coupled with the dependency that we've had we've grown on technology over the last 25 years or longer, means that it is, significantly more complex and costly than what we had to deal with Y2K, for all the understandable reasons.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, there are still embedded devices out there that can't quite run AES, like traditional cryptography here, let alone post-quantum cryptography. So does the implication of what you're saying, does that mean that this problem of adopting post-quantum cryptography, does that mean that we're going to be experiencing this for a long time? I guess what's the time horizon on experiencing this problem?
Yeah, so we outlined earlier in the year what the timelines are and for the UK, and what we're saying is critical systems need to be done by 2030, then the rest by 2035. But what we're being very clear on is over the next while, organizations should, the next couple of years, should focus on merely cataloging and understanding where they have kind of implicated or impacted technology, and then planning the migration away from that. So it's going to be a decade or more transition in totality, but rushing it now to actually do the change is not going. So we'd say do it once, do it well, rather than many times because you've rushed it in the early years when we have a little bit of time.
It's been interesting to watch. Quantum cryptography or post-quantum cryptography has been the field of study kind of reserved for those truly geeky, like myself. And yet I'm starting to see some evidence that it's during the public discourse. So most recently, just in the last couple of weeks, actually, some very old Bitcoin wallet addresses apparently have woken up, and tens of thousands of Bitcoin, which is now worth either hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, depending on the exchange rate, have been kind of floating around out there. And so one of the suppositions is that, somebody finally, some person, some group, some nation state has finally cracked traditional cryptography. Maybe there's a quantum computer out there that is now at the point of being able to go after traditional cryptography. So presumably you can't comment on that necessarily, but maybe one of the questions that I would ask for you is, assuming that quantum computing does produce the results that we think it will and be able to crack traditional cryptography, where do you expect that to show up? Where will we see first evidence of post-quantum computing being real?
Yeah, and I think without going into specifics, it will be in the national security sphere. Let's be really transparent. And I love the fact that it's a thing of Hollywood to suggest that if the first quantum computer that's capable with, someone is just doing some flex through moving some Bitcoin around, and I love that. And if only we had such strong canaries, then I think we'd be in good space. But no, I don't think that we expect it there. And our perspective is that there will be, prior to that event, there will be potential evidence through other algorithmic advantage on lesser problem than Shor's algorithm. So, there will be a lead up, but we would expect that naturally the first organizations to have access to this are going to be in the national security space and those of national security mission challenges.
So if I could poke on that a little bit, we have seen, certainly in the ransomware space, that nation states, i.e. specifically North Korea, have focused on cyber attacks for monetary gain. Is it completely out of the realm of possibility that a nation state would, for they believe to be national security reasons, go after financial assets, be it crypto, or I shouldn't use crypto in that context in this conversation, be it blockchain assets or cryptocurrencies, et cetera? Do you think that they're their own possibility?
Well, I would defer to kind of others that are more adept at super forecasting than I. But I think if you have that capability, telling the world that you've got it by doing things for financial gain is a very interesting strategy, I would observe.
That's fair enough. So switching gears a little bit, you've spoken about the need for deeper systems thinking in cyber, not just tech fixes, but market policy, people fixes too. What's one big non-technical change we need just as urgently as a technical change?
Yeah. And so one of the kind of the examples that we use here is, how do organizations measure their technical debt? Because actually, when you go and actually have a board level discussion today, boards really do wrestle here, candidly. And so one of the cartoon proxies that we use is, if you just took depreciated IT assets on the balance sheet because they're not being recapitalized, that is potentially a good proxy for that. But basically, how we bring cybersecurity challenges into the language of business that actually allows executives to almost do the kind of the balancing equation. If I could do this, but then this grows here, and that looks, and that's a suboptimal financial outcome. But realistically, without that, we end up talking about this kind of this all-encompassing existential risk, which is really hard to get after. And actually providing some of these tools could be really quite useful to allow people for benchmarking purposes, for comparison purposes, for kind of, impact measurement purposes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So maybe sticking on that idea of resilience, you've been critical of feature-first products that ignore either resilience or cybersecurity. What's the most ridiculous example you've seen of security being sacrificed for the cool aspect of features?
I'm not sure I have a kind of a glorious example of where someone did something, but I think we would all recognize it. I think we would all recognize the pressure that all technology vendors are there. I've worked for them in former lives, and we have to recognize that if on one hand, you have the ability to go and deal with those deprecated third-party libraries, which are carrying vulnerabilities, which could be potentially exploited, and the feature that 30% of your clientele are asking for, which one wins? But the problem is that there's a lot more of the latter than there is the capacity to do the former. And so it's only, I think criticism is too far. I think I'm just calling it for the honesty. Like, let's not kid ourselves. I think, when we think of examples of kind of the adverse outcomes, it is, I said last year, in 2024, we had vulnerabilities in edge security products with vulnerability classes that we teach kids to find and that we've known about for 25 years. That doesn't sit comfortably, that's the world in which we operate. And yet they're shipping new features.
So what is the role of government and what is the role of industry in cyber defense?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think that the answer has changed over at least our lifetime. So NCC turns 10 next year. And I think when we rewind back to 10 years ago, we saw, government could kind of charge on the field, drive change at scale, because arguably it was a simpler game. I think, where we've got to is industry now really needs to own its own cyber defense. I think, the reality is that we don't have a healthcare akin to for cybersecurity. And so it is for governments to kind of drive the right policy clearly, create the right environment for those companies to thrive, to provide technical insights and challenge where appropriate. But ultimately, it is the private sector then that needs to deal with, in a sustainable way, the cybersecurity, both in terms of, as we've discussed throughout the episode, kind of technology production and the services around that, but then also the consumption of those and enterprise resilience more broadly, because otherwise we aren't going to have a private sector that is able to service its needs, and we'll almost be making it kind of slightly infantilizing it almost. And so that's ultimately the trajectory that we're heading on for sure.
I think it's tricky. I mean, one of the challenges that I hear often from CISOs, and usually this is right after a data theft or a ransomware event or something, is that they feel like there's a sense that industry can only do so much, and that the authorities that they have are very much defensive. And so if you have somebody who, the physical example would be if you have somebody who just every day throws rocks at your building, and yet you don't have the authority to go do anything to that person throwing the rock because they're across the street and they're not on your premises, that there's only so much that they can do, and that there needs to be some sort of partnership to be able to go after that individual. And the reality, which you and I know, although perhaps our listeners do not, is that companies are having rocks thrown at them daily by automated botnets, by denial of service attacks, by password credential stuffing attack, where bad guys just constantly test password, and to a certain extent, organizations just have to deal with it. So perhaps where do you see is the ideal, perhaps not today, but the ideal line of demarcation between what industry is responsible for and what government is responsible for?
Well, and again, I think we go back to, which is the government is responsible for where it should do, having strategic upstream impact, and that's through all the tools of state, be it diplomatic and otherwise, to dissuade, deny, degrade adversaries ultimately. But this is where, let's be really honest, if we take the credential stuffing example, we have solutions here, right? They're called passkeys, or similar, and yet they're not being adopted. So we have the answer to a lot of these things. We have companies who are able to repel, as a service, massive DDoS attacks, the biggest in fact that they have ever seen successfully. And yet these are not being adopted. And so we also have to recognize that over the time, we have shown privileged access workstations as a design pattern. If you don't have your management plane on the internet, it's very hard to systemically compromise you, it turns out. If you have passkeys, which are a phishing-resistant form of arguably multi-factor authentication, it's really hard to kind of compromise the accounts that underlie it. Then we go on to content arming, deconstruction and reconstruction, a great way to mitigate at the edge malicious attachments. So again, we've shown actually how we do this, we can go to memory safe languages, et cetera, et cetera. And yet organizations at times may say, but yet we can't. And so there's a slight contradiction there, which we do need to get the bottom of. We know how to do this. We've done the hard yards, but actually it's getting the adoption of that work. And I don't think anyone is suggesting that we want to subsidize the private sector to adopt these things as it takes the profits.
Ollie, this has been a fantastic conversation. I could definitely talk to you for hours and hours and hours. But maybe one of the things that I just wanted to call attention to, you publish on a weekly basis a phenomenally comprehensive Substack. And I hope for your sake that you have a huge army who helps you with that Substack. I somewhat doubt it based on your shaking of your head, but it is a fantastic resource and I'd encourage everybody to go sign up. Maybe any comments there, or where can people find your Substack?
All I would say, it's a labor of love, and there is not an army of people. It is something I was doing before I joined, which I agreed to continue to where I was doing it. Anyway, it's a CTO at ncsc.substack.com, and you can find it there.
Well, let's get you some AI agents at the very least to help you with your production on that newsletter.
But again, let's be really honest. Can they be as discerning? Can they synthesize 3 decades worth of experience to work out what the highest signal point is that the readership love? I don't think we're past the point of, maybe I'm overplaying myself, and this is why I'm going to be obsolete, but human creation wins in my mind still, maybe.
Fair. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're right. I think decisioning and curation are two things that we're not yet at the point of being able to delegate to AI.
It's huge.
Well, it's been, Ollie, it's been fantastic speaking with you. Any final words, or where can people find you online if they have questions?
Yeah, so you can find me on all the socials. Yeah, I'm sure people can find, can Google my name. It's been a true pleasure, right? But all I will say is I'll leave with the people, cyber is a team sport, right? But then also, let's not let the hyperbole run away. So let's bring the evidence as we do this, and then the world will be a materially better place.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Code and Country.